Hello everyone. This is the Kubernetes SIG PM meeting for March 26, 2019. This is a public meeting, so please be aware of that. Please adhere to the Kubernetes Code of Conduct. This will be up on the internet on YouTube later. So first off, I want to give anyone who has not been here before an opportunity to say hi and introduce themselves, what they're hoping to get out of this. Go for it. Cool. So I think maybe Vic and Claire, your first times here. Claire, maybe not your first time, but Vic, you seem like a new face.
Hey, hello everyone. I'm typically in stuff, but I'm from Portworx, kind of joining the PM SIG team to understand the flow.
Sure.
And just observing right now, and then maybe I may have some questions or figure out how I can contribute to the team.
Well, welcome. And I also see we've got Aaron here. So Aaron, were there release-specific things that you wanted to chat about?
Oh, come on. Just because I show up doesn't mean I have to talk all the time.
Well, I figure. Yeah, why not?
I'm late for adding stuff to the agenda here, so I'm happy to go at the end. But I thought if we wanted to, we could maybe seed the Kubernetes 114 retro, maybe talk about KEPs a little bit. I don't know if y'all have done that a little more in depth here, but maybe just take some time to brainstorm some things that we thought went well and some things that we thought we could do better, and maybe some action items that we're thinking about as we look to improving KEPs for the next quarter to help Claire more effectively run the 115 release.
Yeah, for sure. So let's tell you what, let's do that at the end. It looks like we've got a small agenda, so we can probably take the rest of the meeting doing that. So Ehor, first up. Sir, you're on mute, by the way. Okay. All right. So Ehor can't unmute, but there is so there's an opportunity to do a SIG PM face-to-face meeting for Contributor Summit in Barcelona. I think what Ehor wants to do is kind of get an idea of what the level of interest is for that. I'm personally a super +1 on that. I think that any opportunity for SIG PM to meet or to figure out how to get more plugged into the project is great. So anybody else? Or who on the call is actually going to KubeCon Barcelona?
I know I'll be there, and I think Lucky will as well.
Okay, cool.
I'm interested in SIG PM face-to-face.
Awesome. So yeah, so you were saying that we're already on the schedule for that. So hope to see more people there. So we can start getting out the message about that. So Lockie wants to talk about the SIG PM sessions for KubeCon. Go for it, Lockie.
Yeah, nothing really specific other than I know that Ehor and yourself had kicked around some ideas there. Just wondering if we could help kind of shape what the agenda is there and start to solidify it. So it was more just how can I help? And if it's not the right time, let me know and we can regroup. So
yeah.
I guess I'll ask you what the status is, Stephen, specifically.
So we currently have an intro and deep dive on the schedule. I think that we'd like to, I think, well, last KubeCon we focused pretty heavily on KEPs. I'm trying to get the word out about KEPs. So I think this time around, we can focus more intently on the some of the things that we're going to be working on for the charter. So the high level items for the new charter will be KEPs, of course, maintaining the process and stewarding people through the KEP submission and approval process. So that's the first item. The second one is project management overall, right? So how do we do project management? How do we groom across SIGs? So this is a newer effort, figuring out what does and doesn't work for SIGs, and kind of like shopping the idea out is going to be part of that. The next one is CNCF end user contributions, right? So kind of like the CNCF end user community is for people who aren't aware, is essentially a membership level for the CNCF that allows you to connect with people that are in various communities using cloud native technologies, right? So this is not essentially equivalent to the gathering of a SIG or something for Kubernetes, but it's more so end user specific focused. Like, so how do we consume these tools? How do we, and what are the practices that you are using at company X or company Y, right? So there is a specific group called CNCF end user. And we want to make sure that we are providing feedback to them, and also being more active in their meetings, right? So being able to kind of like open up that feedback loop between the two groups, we think will be valuable for the long term. The usual habit, I think it's maybe once every 2 quarters or something like that. We'll do like a presentation at the CNCF end user meetings, and we're kind of thinking that that's not sufficient, right? And that's kind of like, hey, here's what we have in our minds, versus hey, let's have a conversation about how we can build a better project, or what you need out of the project, right? So to that end, I'll actually be I'll be on one of the CNCF end user forum calls for myself and Ehor, I believe, right? For June 11th. Those calls, yeah, I think I have to see what whether or not those calls are public. They're not, right, Ehor? You can, okay, yeah, not public, but we will be there to talk a little bit about SIG PM. So if there are thoughts about that ahead of time, let me know. So the last piece of the charter is then communications in general, right? So how do we handle external communication? So things that you see commonly associated to communication would be like the release announcements, right? So there are two roles within the release team, the enhancements lead and the communications lead, that are kind of in a tight feedback loop with SIG PM overall. So they're essentially what happens is, right, there's a kind of a press cycle that happens throughout the quarter, right? Figuring out what's going to go in the release blog, figuring out who is going to be part of the webinars, how we track those people down, how we communicate these things accordingly, as well as the general comms for releasing not the release announcements themselves, but the Kubernetes blog posts, things like podcasts, stuff like that. So trying to find a central place to essentially deliver that, right? And then things like who does surveys. If I wanted to survey the Kubernetes community, how would I do that, right? And that's currently us, right? So actually saying that that's possible, right, will be the last piece of the charter. So to get back to your question, Lockie, we want to make sure that those things are known, and we'll probably break an intro or a little breakdown of what that is for the intro, and then probably have yet again for the deep dive a session on KEPs. I think at this point the idea is socialized to the point where we should focus on moving into what does a good KEP look like, maybe, and how do we get one approved quickly? Right, so I think a lot of the churn around KEPs is how do we move KEPs from how do I create a provisional KEP that will get approved quickly, right? And then how do I move from a provisional KEP to implementable, right? And get something that the release team can actually consume, is happy with, and understands the status of, right? So so maybe a session on that would be helpful. Questions, comments? I'm gonna break for water.
Just having gone through the comms portion as release lead for 1.14, I think it kind of makes me think about what the purpose of this SIG is supposed to be in the context of if you're coming to this SIG expecting to be able to implement some kind of top-down enforcement, I think you're going to be disappointed. A lot of the communications that were part of the release were not saying upfront, okay, this is what the release is going to look like, here's what's going to go in it, and it's going to be this way. Instead, through the progressive use of KEPs and then an enhancement freeze and then getting people to really question whether or not their particular feature was ready, we had time close to the end of the release cycle to sort of evaluate everything that was landing in the release and see if we could identify narratives that made sense for the release as a whole. So if you're coming in here to figure out how to most effectively steward and control a KEP through the release, yeah, that's probably a great thing. If you're trying to come here to say, like, we're going to mandate that the releases from here on out are going to have a theme of X, Y, and Z, that's going to be tougher unless we put in all of the groundwork to make KEPs a more effective forum for communication and collaboration about project priorities and finding ways to get people to sort of come to consensus on all of that. Because KEPs are now the one place, so maybe we have one place where it's easier to come to consensus on, but there's still many groups with many opinions about what they want to land, both the project communities as well as individual vendors.
So was that the, just a curiosity, was that the external U or was that the U as SIG PM that you were referring to? Was that a note for, was that a note for new contributors or new people to the call or for SIG PM?
I think, maybe for SIG PM, I'm trying to understand, like, what level of authority and control and steering is it that you are looking to affect on the project? Because
right, so that is, so the goal there is not to, so during the release cycle, as you were saying, the themes for the release should bubble up like organically based on the stuff that's going into the release. We are not a body that wants to dictate what the theme of a release should be or how to effectively release for Kubernetes, right? I think that part of the goal is to figure out how to build a consistent process across the project and shepherd that process and allow SIGs to do their work, right? We're not here to get in the way of that or have any mandates from on high outside of trying to build consistent process. So.
Cool. I didn't mean to, I actually have to bounce out of here in 15 minutes, so I'm cool moving on if there's nothing else.
Cool. Yeah, I just wanted to make that clear that we're not here to dictate anything. We're here to figure out how to help. So if KEPs are the place, we need to figure out how to make that even better. Let's pop into speaking of KEPs, right? Pop into that retro doc.
Sure.
So since both you and Claire are here, what do you think went well KEPs wise? What do you think went wrong?
Let's see. What went well? People actually got the memo and they actually agreed to do it. I think it was Claire's superhuman effort as well as the rest of her team to sort of keep the flow of communication going there. That was also helpful. I think because there was a high degree of uncertainty initially, it was helpful to have some high bandwidth faces being introduced to SIGs that we know are high volume producers and might have a lot of questions. I kind of want to stop talking and hear from Claire. I talk too much, sorry.
I think in terms of what went well, it was nice that we did eventually get a KEP in an implementable state for every enhancement. I think what could have gone better from my perspective is it would have been nice to see more more communication around like what we really wanted within these KEPs. So I know we talked about really wanting testing plans and graduation criteria. And I don't think everyone had that across the board. And by everyone, like I think when I went and did a first pass through, it was like 50% had testing plans until you poked them and asked them to PR in testing plans. And so if that's like a requirement, I think it would be nice to have that clear up front, as well as some feedback for them around like what qualifies as like good testing plans, because some, I don't know if they were good or not because I don't have tons of context on testing, but they didn't seem that good. They might have been like 2 bullet points. So
Yeah, so I think that overall well, two things happened, right? So we announced that they were a requirement. So that became a scramble at the beginning of the cycle. We did that right at the beginning of the cycle, yeah. And then later in the cycle, we actually added, we updated the template, right? We updated the template to include the release team checklist, right? Which was not there before. So KEPs that were in an implementable state that were already merged, are already merged in an implementable state that did not have the release team checklist, right? They had to go back and do it. And the ones that were in flight are already ready to merge had to go back and figure out what the checklist would look like. So yeah, I think that, you know, part of what we can do for 115 is make sure that that's really clear, right? That needs to be part of it if it's something that's being released in-tree to in-tree Kubernetes. I'm wondering what else, like, is this a long message? Is it continual poking? Is it reaching out to every SIG or going to SIG meetings, right? To drive that message? Like what can we be doing? Because like, yeah, I'm hearing a lot of confusion around the like churn for KEPs, right? And I think that, you know, this might have come up on Twitter last night or something. But one of the notes was that I'm not sure what level of detail needs to be there, right? Or how long something needs to be bike shedded over, you know, before marking it as like this is a good design or this is even a good idea, right? I think we've said this before, but you know, the general sentiment is, you know, merge early and iterate often, right? So if you're, I think, you know, from the SIG perspective, you should be looking at a KEP that is provisional, right? Does it have an intro? Does it have some motivation, right? Does it have a sense of scope, right? You know, on the provisional side, is this a good idea for our SIG to move forward with? Is the question that you're trying to answer, right? When we move from provisional to implementable, right? That's okay. We've decided we're going to build this, right? Here are the things that we need to do for it to be successful. And one of those things is to fill out that release team checklist, right? Which includes like, where are we getting your docs from? What is your test plan? What is the graduation criteria for this thing, right? So I think really messaging that hard before the next release starts is going to be important.
Okay. Can I conduct some opinions? So I think consider the timeline of a month from now. That was a month from the start of the release cycle was when we placed enhancements freeze last time. So presumably that's where we're going to see enhancements freeze for 115. So I would consider what can this SIG meaningfully accomplishment well ahead of the end of April. Like, what could we do to make things better by the middle of April? I think the unfortunate bike shedding that happened over CAPS was confusing. I hope that we're in a better place. So like verbally and in a bunch of different channels, I felt like requirements were clearly communicated, but then when it came time to update a template and make sure everything was nicely documented, it got bike shedded between this SIG architecture, and SIG release, and we didn't quite get into that merge and iterate stance. It would be really helpful if we could try to focus all of our discussions in one place. And I also feel like it'd be super helpful if we had that at a higher frequency than bi-weekly. And so I suggested during the last release cycle, but did not actually get as far as implementing myself because I am not a SIG PM chair, that it would be a good idea for SIG PM to break off discussions about KEPs into sort of their own sub-project recurring meeting that maybe happens at least a weekly basis. It could be really helpful to iterate on requirements and stuff as we get to 115. I also feel like there has not been clear, effective use of the KEP implementation board, so that I don't actually know what the plan of record is and who's working on the plan of record to improve the KEP process as a whole. So I feel like those are all of my meta concerns with how we could improve this. And then in terms of what we could do, tactically speaking, I think making sure that there are actually links to the KEPs themselves instead of links to an initial PR for KEP would be helpful. I was thinking I would go through and reconcile that for all of the 114 issues today or tomorrow, so that people have something that they can copy paste from. We have already updated the KEP template or the feature tracking issue template to describe this, but I think having clear and concise examples for people to copy paste from would be helpful. I also agree about the lack of consistency and quality in all of the KEPs, and I don't entirely know what to do about that other than for us to get, to focus on that a little bit more.
So something I had mentioned in SIG architecture, and I think I've mentioned it at a few places, that it would be useful to have, and this is something that we currently don't have, unified graduation criteria for the project, right? That does not exist today.
I agree.
And I think that, if the expectation for a KEP author who is not necessarily familiar with all of the hidey holes of the project, right, is to develop some sort of graduation criteria that fits for whoever's reviewing it, right? And not just whoever's reviewing it, but potentially the release team, potentially SIG architecture, right? And until we have that, we're going to keep going into the cycle of this is not sufficient, right? This is not sufficient to graduate. Well, what's the reason, right? Well, the reason is that it doesn't fit some mold that doesn't exist yet, right? So I think that, we actually had that issue for, I'm sure there were probably a few different enhancements that ran into this, but Windows was one of them, right? Windows got thrown back at least a release cycle as a result of this, right? We said we're going to set the bar a little higher, right? Or SIG architecture said we're going to set the bar a little higher, right? And as a result, they had to go back and figure out adding tests for different things, or considering this, or rewriting blah, or updating this doc, and we're going to continue running into that issue until there's some sort of unified graduation criteria.
I agree with that. I think that's a great discussion to take up with SIG architecture. And now they have a lot of prior art to look at for existing graduation criteria, so we can hopefully synthesize that. But I would just strongly encourage this group to pick somebody or a group of people to be the dedicated owners and to really drive this process forward, collaborating actively with Claire in anticipation of some kind of deadline of sanity for everybody who's trying to write KEPs furiously right now and get them into the 115 release ahead of an enhancements freeze.
Yeah, Claire, we can work on that together.
I will help as I am able to tighten things up from the testing definition perspective, because I agree completely. Some of them were not adequate. And I have to run with that, unfortunately. But thank you for entertaining the discussion on this, and I look forward to seeing continued progress on this for 115.
Thanks for coming, Aaron. Later.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think another question I had around some of this CUP process, and I don't know if this is like a SIG PM question or a SIG ARC question, but is there even a checklist of things to have in your CUP for it to be considered implementable? Or like,
yeah, it's actually it's in the, hold on a second. It's actually in, so the updated template that we did for the CUPs includes a release team checklist, which includes all of the things that you should have if you're going to be marked as implementable. There is a tricky distinction though between, and not a clear distinction at all between the CUPs that land for in-tree and out-of-tree, right, projects, right? So the release team really only cares about things that are going into Kubernetes, right? Or things that can potentially affect the code that's in Kubernetes, right? I'm just getting the template. Yeah, so each part of this template, like the template reads a little less, so Joe had pointed out that the template reads a little less like a template and more like instructions at this point. And I think part of me is okay with that. It's good to have a single document to look at and understand what you need to do without having to jump back and forth. So I think that what we've put down as a release sign-off checklist at the top is pretty clear.
yes, I would agree. Sorry, I probably really bad to admit this being like former enhancements lead, but I hadn't seen or gone through this doc really thoroughly in depth until now.
I mean, there's too much Kubernetes. As a former enhancements lead myself, like there's too much Kubernetes, and we actually took a while bike shedding on this template, and it's not done yet, right? It's one of those things that I think is living document, and I'm trying to find the PR where this merged. But it's something that we're going to consistently have to change over time. I think that every time we go into release cycle, we learn, we have new people in the mix, and we learn something new. We create some new process, we edit old processes. So I think that at least where we're moving, or at least where we've been moving around KEPs is a direction, and I think it's a adequate direction right now. Can it be much better? Absolutely. But I think we're moving in a direction. I want to say it's the right one. We're gonna need a few more releases to see what that is. But in addition to that template, there are also a set of reviews that people were interested in doing, additional additional questions that they had on the template, and I'm just pulling up tracking boards and stuff here. So here is the tracking board for the meta KEP, the KEP implementation tracking KEP, and so to Aaron's point, wondering who is actually working on this stuff. This stuff is owned by me currently, and so there's some of the issues around tooling that is owned by Caleb right now, and there are some of these issues that I think one of the bigger parts of this is, as you can see, there are a few things on the board. So one of them is getting the message out to the community, figuring out who is interested in working on this stuff, and then shifting charting some of that out to the people who are interested, right? So Lockie has taken an active interest in this, and actually 2 weeks ago. Yeah, 2 weeks ago, I went to Microsoft and hung out with him for a while and just went through this board to chat about it. So here is one of the, Lockie has already merged some updates to the process flow for the documentation within the enhancements repo, as well as some tweaks on the language for the READMEs. So it's not just being done by a few people now. We've got a few more people in the mix. I am curious, if anyone wants to raise their hand, they're interested in getting involved with some of this stuff. I can get more detailed on some of these issues, so that it's so that someone else can pick them up. So that
I think.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry.
Go for it. Go for it.
No, just to kind of dive in. I'm sorry, I'm sitting on a plane, so mileage may vary. I think one thing tactically that I would like us to do as part of the SIG is to potentially go and run the CAP retro against some of the SIGs and identify the top and tactical pieces, that amendments that we could make to the CAP based on that feedback. So, I know we've been collecting some feedback, but like in the context of what just happened in the last release and what can we do better to assist SIGs to be able to delegate pieces of that out, because presumably features are being bubbled up via SIG chairs, enhancements I should say, and those enhancements, we should be, we either go into their SIGs and verbalize the process for what's happening in the release, as either the enhancements team could pick that up as part of the release, or SIG PM could go in and advocate for what the process is, because I think there's almost a one-pager that's less verbose than what we have, which is like, hey, I want to land an enhancement in this cycle. Here's what we need to do. And it's almost like, can you give me the TLDR on the links of where I should go? Because I feel like, you need to get it to implement them. What does that mean? Well, it means you have to have a graduation criteria, and it means you have to have a test plan. Okay, then it should be labeled. I don't know. It's kind of like, could you write down the process of what Claire was actually doing as the enhancements lead on one page, so that presumably the idea would be that they'd come in higher quality and with less questions.
So
I just found, like, obviously, criteria and graduation criteria for specific CAP states people stumbled on. So even though it's clear there, what does it mean and what are we going to gate on is hard.
So I actually think that is something tangible that we can do, and we can do soon. Claire, let's schedule time to just go over what the experience was last cycle, and we can talk features to enhancements lead, and figure out what the process is, because I think it shifts a little bit every cycle, especially now with the addition of the CAPs. So yeah, let's figure something out, and I think a one-pager is a good action item.
Cool. That sounds good to me.
I'd also get Kendrick in, given that he's coming in. He's got to fly the flag for 115.
Yeah.
On enhancements.
Yeah. Good plan. All right. Any more opinions on that? I know Ihor can't unmute, but maybe Dewal, Kevin, Vic.
I don't have any.
Cool. Awesome. All right. So part of my work for the next few weeks, I will be well, hopefully it doesn't take weeks. I've been kind of offline for conferences and orientation the last few weeks, but I would like to. Nice. So Ihor's unmute button has disappeared altogether. So yeah, I would like to finish grooming the. So we have two boards, right? One is the SIG PM board, which I'm tossing in the chat now. And the other one is the CAP implementation tracking board, and that is a little further up in the chat as projects 5. So I will be working on grooming these boards along with the Claire, I'll be doing the SIG release board. There's a project board for SIG release now. I want to get some of that stuff up so that it's usable for 115. And then we can sit down and talk about some of it too. Cool. So I am looking at, is there anything specific that people want to call out on this retro sheet, as it's our last item? And as the incoming release lead, are there things that you want to call out specifically that you could use SIG PM's help with, Claire?
I think a lot of the cup stuff we've talked about will probably be very helpful, because I'm planning to keep it the exact same, where if you don't have a cup implementable by enhancement freeze, you're off the milestone, or you have to file an exception to get back on.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully we don't need to do a mini extension this time, because hopefully it'll be clear enough to everyone. So I think, yeah, mostly the cup stuff. And I guess one other question I had is outgoing enhancements lead, that I don't know if this is a good question for SIG PM or if this is better for SIG release. If there are any sort of guidelines around what should be getting tracked and what should be getting a KEP. And what I mean by that is there were about 3 issues that I'd been tracking for enhancements because they had issues that were open in the enhancements repo. And then at the end of cycle, Aaron was like, oh, should we have been tracking these? They're not graduating. And I was like, I don't know. They said they had PRs to merge, so I was confused. Put them on to be safe. And I don't.
Right.
Yeah.
So we will only track, or what I've been doing is, or what we were doing, or the last few enhancements leads have been doing, is only tracking things that are graduating from either being introduced as net new, which is, so there's like a column on the sheet for, I've added the column on the sheet for like net new versus graduating, right? So you can understand at a glance what's net new or graduating, right? So yeah, we'll only track, so if PRs are landing for other enhancements, I would say that's fine. I don't think we have a system in place to actually track everything, right? It's very hard to be able to introspect on every PR in Kubernetes and try to attach it to some enhancement or KEP that doesn't exist, or to some general overarching theme, right? Some things are just things that land. So yeah, we'll really only track things that are graduating or being introduced.
Cool. Sounds good.
So one of the things that we were considering doing, and I don't know if this is the right time to do it, was the idea of moving away from enhancements issues altogether and moving to a kind of receipts tracking situation. This was an idea that Caleb had, and Lubomir actually put up an issue for it recently, which I think we probably need to end up writing a KEP for, practice what we preach, around finding some, building some system that is essentially tracking receipts of KEPs, right, as part of the release train, as opposed to the back and forth conversation on enhancement tracking issues, right? So the idea would be that the enhancements repo would have a set of releases the same way the release repo does, the SIG release repo does, right? And those releases would be broken into subdirectories of proposed, accepted, proposed, accepted, exceptions, and slipped, right? So the idea being that you, as a SIG, could come in, write essentially a YAML ticket, right? That would include, the name of the enhancement, a link to the KEP, and maybe some other relevant metadata. Merge that receipt, right? That receipt would get merged into proposed, right? And then some piece of automation would scrape the stuff in the proposed directory and move that into the accepted directory, right? So then there's no longer a conversation between humans about what's happening in the release or whether or not it's landing. If it's in proposed, right, that means it's being considered as a candidate for release, right? And if it gets from proposed into accepted, that means that the automation worked and that your thing was in on time, right? Right, the automation, would kick in at the, once enhancements freeze hits at whatever time we dictate. And if it's not in there, then it's not in the release. Right, so there's no longer this, hey, we were trying to do this and we were wondering about blah, right? There is an automation piece that's in place that you are aware of that process, right? So, the question becomes, do we have enough time to do something like that? And I'm not sure is the answer for 115 at least. I think it's a great idea because it allows us to drain the queue of 150 plus issues, enhancement tracking issues, and it removes the need to have to track down people essentially across all of those issues. But one of the things that needs to happen is we need to drain that queue. So.
Yeah, in terms of do we have enough time for 115? I have concerns that it might be hard to teach all the different SIGs a new thing going on. Though I do like the idea to be anything that helps add more automation, I'm all for. I just do have concerns since we're probably starting the 115 cycle in a couple weeks, if that's enough time to reach out to all the SIGs and get everyone on the same page.
Yeah, so Ihor is kind of saying the same in the chat. I agree that this is something, again, all of the stuff that we're touching right now is, functionally changing some of the process that people are used to, right? So there are, there are preconceived understandings of what it should be. I think that, we have one in place that we've said KEPs are now mandatory for the release cycle. So we should make sure that's sound before doing anything else. Ihor is saying that, you try to gracefully move into that new schema across the next 2-3 release cycles, right? So this is something that we can start bubbling up the idea within the 115 cycle, introduce it as alpha for the 116 cycle, and then start to move forward down the line for the next few releases. That said, that's all I had personally. I would strongly suggest everyone who is on the call or hearing this later to take a moment to look at the retrospective document for the Kubernetes 114 release. That is available. I will put it in the meeting notes if it's not already. I think Aaron might have done that already. Yeah, it's in the meeting notes. And we will be having a SIG release team retrospective takeover for the community meeting this week on Thursday. So stay tuned. See you there. Thank you everyone for.
Hey,
Oh, there was a thing.
sorry,
Hey.
Stephen. I thought you would open up the floor, but I had a question with respect to the project boards. And during the working group LTS meetings, we found that there were a lot of usability, UX kind of user experience issues with the project boards, being able to triage. And we were thinking of some features to be added, like being able to triage issues based on labels directly into certain columns.
So there
the right place?
are, yes, there are a few places to discuss that here and in contributor experience. So there is an issue open right now around, I'm wondering if this is in test infra, around being able to automatically add things to project boards within the Kubernetes orgs, right? So this is not a lack of, this is not like a lack of function, like a functionality that we haven't enabled. This is functionality that does not exist for GitHub project boards, right? So we would have to apply some Kubernetes secret sauce on top of it to make that happen. But there is, let's see, projects. There was someone interested in, and I believe they're doing it right now, to build a plugin. See if I can find it. Yeah, to build a plugin to allow you to automatically pop issues onto a project board, issues and PRs onto a project board based on labels, right? So, the idea would be, same with everything in Prow, right? You have some config.yaml file that you set for your teams or your set of projects, and based on that, it would consume this automation. So I am not seeing it off the bat. So short answer is it doesn't exist right now, right? It's something that someone is working on. This person is not a usual Kubernetes contributor. So we're trying to kind of dig in and figure out what the current status is, but it is on, I just posted in the chat. And I believe that, let me just go through the comments. I believe that PR might be moving along. PR needs rebase. Okay. Yeah, this person's been out of pocket for a little bit. I think either they will pick the work back up, or we might have someone in test info willing to pick the work back up. So that is TBD. I don't have all the details, but I can work on getting them for you. What were the other questions?
I think that suffices. I can go and look at the issue and see what they're trying to fix and comment there. There were a couple of issues that were tracking this, and I updated them, and those got closed in favor of other issues. So I just thought I'll come back and mention those issues here.
Yeah, for sure. And this is within that issue, there's a pull that is in need of a rebase right now.
Yep, I'll comment on the issue and give more updates there too.
Alrighty, sounds good. Are there any other topics that people want to discuss before we close out? Going once, going twice. All right. Thank you all for coming. It's been a pleasure. I will see you in 2 weeks. Later.